Welcome to this week's discussion of Parshat Yitro, one that is jam-packed, and we are beyond privileged to have the incomparable, indomitable, now former CEO of One Table, Aliza Kline, somebody whose Torah is just, it not only is it authentic because she brings it out into everything she does, but lineage-wise, your dad was a rabbi.
My dad is a rabbi, thank God, and my grandfather was. Yeah.
Multi-generational,
and I think there's more back there too. Yeah.
Incredible. Well, Lisa, thank you for sharing your Torah and sharing your wisdom with us. A lot going on in the world, a lot going on in this moment in particular, and on this week for Parshat Yitro. But before we get in, just how are you doing? Where are you? What's going on?
Well, I'm just a few weeks after having left One Table, where I was the founding president and CEO for 11 years, and so there's a very significant moment of transition, and it feels very much aligned with the world, which feels like it's also in a massive moment of transition. I have launched my own kind of study and investigation into chen, which is Hebrew for grace. And I find myself kind of searching for examples of it. There are so many examples of a lack of grace right now. And I'm on the hunt for the positive examples and trying to think about how Jewish teachings and understandings of grace can inform the way we lead in an organization, and how we acknowledge the kind of tumult that we're living in right now. It's a very nice segue into all the leadership of Yitro.
It is. And I mean, as somebody who navigated the world of organizational Jewish leadership for so long, having that vantage point to think about the ways in which we offer grace to the multiple levels of our movements, of our organizations, of our society. I am so excited to learn from you of what you find and go along on that journey.
Yeah, I encourage you to just listen for the contemporary usages of it in different ways. And I had an injury, and so I have physical and occupational therapy, and I forgot my forms. I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot my forms again. And this woman at the edge was like, honey, you just broke your thumb. Have a little grace. Bring the forms next time. And I was like, oh, there it is. And there are lots and lots of these moments if we look and pay attention. And it is a really nice thing to be hunting for in this time.
Well, the chen as a word, very close to my heart in terms of my wife's Hebrew name, Chana, but also son Hanan. So also just touching here. So diving into the parsha, Yitro, sort of in rapid succession here, we have the Israelites are traveling through the desert and have had quite an experience so far. It opens with Moshe's father-in-law, Yitro, hearing about all that God had done for the Israelites and everything that they had gone through. He goes to meet Moshe. Moshe greets him. They recap everything that's going on. Moshe is excited to tell his father-in-law all of the wonders that God had done, but everything that the Israelites had been through. Yitro sees Moshe going through what his role as magistrate for the Jewish people has been. He goes, what are you doing? You can't be the only person for everybody. Listen to me. I believe in God. I see God. I understand. You will be the one that teaches them how to judge, set up people who are in charge of the thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They'll deal with the little things. You'll deal with the big things with God. Moses does this, and it really, truly saves the Jewish people in this way. And then Yitro goes, I'm out. So he goes back to Midian, back to his home. We then have Hashem say to Moshe, have the Israelite people prepare themselves, and I am going to start to give you the covenants of being a people unto me. The Israelite people prepare themselves. God comes down in a cloud over Mount Sinai. The whole mountain shakes. The Israelites get to see God directly. He gives them the Aseret Dibrot, the 10 commandments. And then the Israelite people go, hey, Moshe, why don't you talk to God and we'll just listen to everything that you say. A little bit too much for us. And Moshe and Hashem say, okay. And that sort of brings us to the end of Yitro as we head into next week, Mishpatim, which we will have a conversation then. So, Aliza, what's standing out for you about Yitro?
I mean, first of all, I love that there's like such high drama. It's like high drama, the cloud and the shaking and the up and the down and the pronouncements. And then it's also like very tactical. Okay, you need this many people to judge this many kind of experiences, and it's going to be on this date. And it's also, as a parsha, it's a little out of order. Like, what? How do we get the Decalogue all right? How do we get the 10 Commandments already? We haven't gotten the Torah yet. Like, it's a little bit confusing. And, I was looking at some of the commentary. They're like, well, sometimes we just got to get a lesson in there. And so the order shifts a little bit. Like, why does Yitro just show up at this point? And he's like, oh, because we can learn from him. So I think you could pull apart the parsha from all different ways of just trying to figure out why is that there and in what order and whatever. But my favorite part, first of all, is that Moshe as like Rabbeinu, as our biggest teacher, keeps evolving. He as a model is like, well, that's a better way to do it. I will try that. Oh my God. And that to me is such an element of like leading with anava, like leading with humility, but also hitlamdut, with curiosity. That's amazing. First of all, those of us who have in-laws know that sometimes it's not very easy to get feedback from them. And instead, Moshe's like, well, that's a good idea. He doesn't even hesitate. He's like, boom, implement that better. So if he's our model, he's a complicated guy and his life keeps evolving. He's so imperfect, but in this way, his ability to listen and be curious, which is why I think he was chosen, back in recognizing the bush that could not be consumed by fire. He noticed and he said, Madua, why is that happening? And I learned commentary that it was that curiosity that said, oh, here's the guy who can lead us out of Egypt. And here he is again, like trying to figure this out. He is just going with his instincts. And then he learns something new and he willingly adapts. Thank God.
Yeah.
Thank God that we have a role model for adaptation.
Beautiful. And I'll also sort of flip from the other side. How do you think the way in which Yitro delivered the feedback allowed for it to be received? Or I guess I can ask it in a question. Do you think that the way in which Yitro delivered it was critical to the way in which Moshe received it?
Well, I can say a few things. I love that the crafters of this parsha thought to have Yitro, who was a Midianite, right, not an Israelite, make the recommendation. And so we have an example of getting wisdom that's not only from a father-in-law, but wisdom that's from a foreigner, right, a Gershon, like a stranger who has seen the beauty of God. So I think there's like a lot in that piece. And I think, is it that Yitro was like, okay, first I'm going to reiterate what you just told me and say, yep, I see that God led you out of Egypt, and that is an all-powerful God. So I'm reinforcing my relationship to you. I see you, Moshe. And now let's talk about doing this more practically. I mean, we haven't even talked about distributed leadership, which this is a beautiful, like we could talk exclusively about that, like the idea of not only Moshe kind of willingly letting go, which, is so different from what we see often, to the idea of like, let's actually empower lots of people to make decisions. What can we gain from all of this different wisdom and from understanding that's like a misdemeanor, that's a major one. Like there's just sort of understanding that civil society has a lot of stuff that needs a lot of adjudication, and we need a lot of people who have, that are thinking about the community. So I feel like there's Yitro's wisdom, there's Yitro's delivery, there's Yitro's personhood. He's not a convert, right? He's not Zipporah. Like I think that is, all of those things are very interesting in terms of how open was Moshe. I'm just going to keep going back to that.
Going to your mantra of today of grace, and this ability for the leadership to lead by example of humility and growth.
Yeah.
Do you ever like think back to the beginning of your time as the founding executive director for whether it was for One Table or any of the other times you've been in this executive role, the like lesson to thy younger self that lines up here, grace, humble leadership?
Well, I think nothing truly works if it is not shared. So in order to be successful at leading an organization, the sooner you are opening up and sharing leadership with your board, with your staff, with your volunteers, I think all of those models are really helpful. Before One Table, I helped found and build Mayim Chaim, which is a mikveh and education center in the Boston area. And we knew that the traditional model for most mikvaot is to have one balanit, sometimes called a shomeret, which is one person who kind of represents the whole community and runs the place. And even if that person is the greatest mommy of a person, just so generous and kind, that's still only one person. And we actually have a lot of people who need to come in. And we tried to see if we could reimagine that. And we created the role of a volunteer mikvah guide that could be any gender and didn't have to be an expert in mikvah, but did need to be an expert in representing the community to create an open space for people. And so now there are hundreds of these mikvah guides. And that I think is like an interesting example here, right? It is actually easier to run a place with one person, much less complicated. You don't have to train people. You don't have to volunteer that. You don't have it's insurance for one person. It's just a totally different thing. But can you create actually a community that way? Absolutely not. So I'm not into like guru style of leadership. It's fun to sit at the heels of a guru and hear them teach. But I don't think that leads to a model of empowering the masses to actually claim Judaism as their own, whereas this is a model that I think opens the door to that in a different way.
Something that comes to mind as you're explaining it this way, which I hadn't even really thought about, is it's also for when Moshe gives the autonomy to these leaders to lead their factions in the way that they see fit, knowing the laws, and here in the way that you've empowered people to build community with Mayim Chaim, that it's not monolithic in the sense that like the way in which people relate to it is literally cookie cutter or identical, and the beauty that comes out of the power that comes out of giving people that runway to create something special and allow for innovation or allow for a new way of seeing things based on personal experience, but without ever losing sight of like the thing that anchors it.
Yeah. So this is a little jargony, forgive me, but but what I think about a lot, and it was true with Mayim Chaim, and it was certainly true at One Table. So you'll see that I have a theme, which is really trusting the end user. Now, when we think about Jews and we think about Israelites, we don't really, end user is very much a sort of a tech term. But the premise is that putting that leadership, all of those levels of magistration in the hands of scores of people instead of one, putting the idea of literally holding the key to the mikveh in the hands of hundreds of people. Obviously, at One Table, the idea was to empower tens of thousands of young people to create Shabbat dinners for their peers in their own homes. They get to be the authority. But in order for any of those things to be successful, that fundamentally you have to trust that they will hold and care for Judaism and Jewish practice in a way that is pure and beautiful, and most likely different from the way you would have done it. So, if I go back to Moshe one more time, and what Yitro saw was like, it doesn't actually have to be you every time. There can be other people and they will do it differently. And that's also okay. Like that's implied, I think. And then sure enough, like we're a complicated people in this parsha and all of Exodus Shemot, where, we're like, I want it this way, I want it this way, I want it this way. And, you see sort of these very dramatic and sometimes humorous back and forths with Moshe and God. And, okay, we'll do it with the cloud. Okay, we'll do it this way. We'll do it without the cloud. Okay, we'll be down here. No, we'll be up here. How do we make this work? And I kind of think that's like a beautiful example of human-centered design. Like we just don't know the answer, but it's got to work for the people, because if it doesn't work for the people, what's the point? And so we're going to have to keep iterating. And there's a lot of iteration already in this part of Exodus.
I'm marking it now, a year from now, that you and I are chavrutaing on Yitro again, because we didn't even touch the parallel here of a founding director, you, and the person who brought them out of Egypt, Moshe doing it a certain way, and then, what it looks like to have a board chair come in and say, maybe we're going to do it differently. So for Yitro MBA class part 2, a year from now, 5786, Aliza, thank you. Thank you for sharing your Torah, your grace, your insights, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.